Welcome, everybody. Today I'm Daniel from Boswell Book Company. This is Lisa from Books and Company. It is day 5,930 of Boswell being in business. Lisa's going to introduce.
Hi. The Denver Post calls Go as a River a beautiful, striking first novel of love and strength and growth set against the forests and rivers of Colorado's high country. Shelley Read is a gifted writer, and the book is a literary triumph. Kirkus gave it a starred review. It won the High Plains Book Award for fiction. Indie Booksellers selected it as an Indie Next Pick, and the Library Journal notes that Go as a River is as beautiful as it is devastating. These are just a few of the many glowing reviews, awards, and recognition that Shelley Read has received for her debut novel, Go as a River, which is an international bestseller and has been translated into 34 languages and has now sold over 1 million copies worldwide. And it is currently in development for film. Shelley Read was an award-winning senior lecturer at Western Colorado University for nearly 3 decades, where she taught writing, literature, and environmental studies. She is a mom, a mountaineer, world traveler, and fifth-generation Coloradan who lives with her family in the Elk Mountains of Colorado's western slope. So congratulations, Shelley, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you all. You're so sweet. Thank you. I can always already feel the love in the room. So thank you all for having me. This beautiful, beautiful bookshop. This evening I'll be at Books and Company. So another beautiful bookshop. I'm super honored to be here. Thank you guys.
Do you want to start by reading a little bit from the book?
Yeah, I will. I'm going to read the prologue to the novel. Can you all hear me okay? Is that good? I'm going to give it a go. Let's see. I'm going glasses. Okay, just for hold for a second. I'm going to read from the prologue of the novel because I think that it's a good place to start our conversation. It puts us right away in Victoria Nash's voice. We'll do a spoiler-free event, so nobody worry if you haven't read the novel yet. But for those of you who have read it, you know that the majority of the novel's in Victoria Nash's first-person point of view. So it establishes her voice and establishes also the place. Place becomes a very essential part of this novel. We can talk about the history of Iola, Colorado, and why I placed it there. But suffice it to say, it was a small town on the western slope of Colorado that was evacuated and flooded and drowned and essentially erased from the map in order to create Blue Mesa Reservoir, which is the largest reservoir in Colorado. So that's what the allusion is here in the prologue. And I'll just read that now so we can start there. Imagine what lingers on the black bottom of a lake. Debris rivered in or tossed from boats grows shaggy and soft. Pouty fish swim their strange lives, far from the hook, in inseparable breath and motion. Imagine patches of lakeweed dancing like lithe, unobserved women. Stand on the edge of a lake, the low waves gulping at your shoes, and imagine how close you are to a world as silent and alien as the moon, out of reach of light and heat and sound. My home is at the bottom of a lake. Our farm lies there, mudbound, its remnants indistinguishable from boat wreckage. Sleek trout troll the remain of my bedroom and the parlor where we sat as a family on Sundays. Barns and troughs rot, tangled barbed wire rusts. The once fertile land marinates in idleness. A history book version of the creation of Blue Mesa Reservoir might portray the project as heroic, part of the grand vision to carry precious water from the Colorado River's tributaries to the arid Southwest. Good intentions may have plugged the once wild Gunnison River and forced it to be a lake, but I know another story. I used to stand knee-deep in this section of the Gunnison when it still rushed fast and frothy through the valley of my birth, the vast and lonely big blue wilderness rising above it. I knew the town of Iola when it woke each morning to fragrant breakfasts and bustling farms and ranches, how the sunshine illuminated the east side of Maine, then inched uptown across the train tracks and schoolyard to ignite the tiny church's one round red and blue stained glass window. I timed my life by the hollow whistle of the 922, the 205, the 547. I knew all the shortcuts and townsfolk and the oldest gnarled tree consistently producing the sweetest peaches in my family's orchard. And I knew, perhaps more than most, the sadness of this place. Good intentions relocated the Iola graveyard high on a hill, each of my family's headstones hopefully matched with their appropriate remains, where it still sits behind a white iron fence, bent and twisted from the weight of snow. Good intentions otherwise drowned the entirety of Iola, Colorado. Imagine a town silent, forgotten, decomposing at the bottom of a lake that once was a river. If this makes you wonder whether the joys and pain of a place wash away as the floodwaters rise and swallow, I can tell you they do not. The landscapes of our youth create us, and we carry them within us, storied by all they gave and stole in who we become. Thank you.
Well, I wanted to ask about the prologue because it sets the scene so well. Is that where you started with the story, or did you come around to it, or did it get pieced together slowly?
Yeah, so the prologue, I worked on it for years. One of the things about the novel that you should know is it took me about 13 years to write this book, very much in the margins of my life. I was teaching full time, I was raising my kids. I can talk about when this novel began for me, but I'm so grateful to Victoria Nash. Once she started forming in my imagination, it's really Victoria who turned me back to my writing life after I had really bumped it to the bottom of my priority list for so many years that I wasn't actually writing at all. But once she started forming in my mind, then I just fell in love with her so much. I love this young woman, and I just felt so compelled to tell her story. I just would jot down a little idea or a thought anytime I possibly could. And so, no, I definitely did not write it in a sequential or linear way. I wrote it very much in scenes or whatever was on my mind at the time in a pretty wacky, nonlinear post-it note kind of way. Literally post-it notes and scraps of paper and napkins and things where I'd be cooking dinner for my family and have an idea and jot something down, or be driving this long, windy road to my university because I live high in the mountains of Colorado. I'll talk with you about that. And if I had an idea, I'd literally like rip a student's paper out of my briefcase and jot some crazy idea down on the back. Eventually, I became a little more technologically inclined and could talk into my phone. But I pieced it together little by little. But this prologue, once I started, the language of it started evolving. I knew it was going to be a really essential way to begin the book because I worked very hard on every sentence of this book. I wanted the language of the novel to reflect the beauty of the language, to reflect the beauty of the Colorado landscape. And I also wanted it to set a certain tone that's quite different from the first actual pages of the novel where Victoria Nash and Wilson Moon meet. So I don't actually know exactly when I started writing it, but I know that once I did, it became a really important exercise in writing in a way for me to say exactly as much as I felt I needed to say in the way that I wanted to say it and nothing else, to try to set the tone for the novel. And I think I probably wasn't able to fully do that until I was well in the piecing together of the rest of the book.
So I didn't cough on people. I just want to make sure I have this right. So when you were originally writing the book, was Victoria not there?
No, Victoria was very much there, but I will say that the original first version of this novel that probably only my husband read, bless him, and was the interwoven story of three women. My original idea for the book was that I really wanted to dig into some of the vulnerabilities, some of the challenges of being a woman in the world. And I wanted to represent it through these three very different experiences of motherhood, with Victoria, with Inga, who ended up staying in the novel, and with a third character who at some point I realized, no, 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 this is Victoria's story, and everything around it needs to serve that story. And anything that isn't in service to telling Victoria's story has to go. And I actually cut out an entire.
Okay,
Yeah.
since this won't
Yeah.
affect the plot at all,
Yeah.
and since we don't know this, tell us like a sentence or two about that missing person.
Well, I will tell you that the essential part of the missing person ended up in Zelda's character. So those of you who have read it, Zelda comes in late in the novel to be essentially the first modern woman of the novel. Earlier, and a catalyst, an important catalyst to Victoria when she really needs it. Earlier, I had a full character that played that role. And once I figured out, I only need her for this. The essence of her had to go, and her entire story had to go, and just the essence stayed in Zelda. I needed a modern woman. I needed a catalyst for Victoria, and that's where Zelda filled that role. So I got rid of the other character. Yeah. Part of, well, you have to know this is my first novel at my age. This is my debut novel. I'm going to be 60 years old in December. It was published when I was 57. I have been writing my entire life, but I've been mostly writing short fiction and poetry, creative nonfiction. I never imagined myself a novelist. It was once I fell in love with Victoria and I started like, who are you? What is your story? And as it started evolving, at some point I thought, oh no, I think this is a novel.
Mm.
And then my second thought, of course, was I don't know how to write a novel. And I literally learned how to write a novel by writing one. And the way that I did was to give myself the grace and the generosity of doing many, 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 many revisions. And in that revising process is where what was important crystallized and what was less important became more clear and just had to go. So I'm super grateful for the process. I really wouldn't have had it any other way than chipping away at it over those 13 years because I evolved quite a bit as a human being during that time. And I think the depth of the novel evolved as well, but also just my understanding of the crafting of writing a long narrative like this really evolved by necessity, I suppose.
I know Lisa has to talk too, but I just before I just have one. I mean, a lot of your characters are so vibrant, but they don't always have big parts. And I'm wondering if that means that you have a lot of backstory written that got taken out about someone like Og, for example.
Yeah, I do. So I graduated from Post-it notes and napkins and little scraps of papers to spiral notebooks at some point where I tried to get myself a little bit more organized. And no joke, I have a stack of spiral notebook about that high of ideas and thoughts about this book that maybe a third, maybe a quarter actually ended up in the novel. And a lot of that was just intuitive over time of what belonged and what didn't. But yes, all of the characters in the book, I know a lot more about each one of them than you do. And it was, a real challenge narratively to make sure that I included, the essential information and nothing else. But I honestly, with the cast of characters in the novel, what I was trying to do with a lot of them was try to dig into, I have a deep empathy and compassion for how hard it is to be a human being. I really do. I think that we all carry grief. We all carry loss. We are all up against something, every single one of us. And if one isn't carrying grief, unfortunately, the fact of life is that you will. And I wanted to dig into each one of these characters. How did this person be able to rise from the challenges in their life? Why did the grief in this person break that person? How does the vitriol of racism and prejudice, how does it form? How is that inherited bias form in somebody's mind where they don't have the ability to see another human being for the beautiful soul they are? Why could Victoria and Will be transcendent of that bias? I went into this novel with just a ton of questions about the complexity of being a human, but honestly with just so much compassion for how difficult it is. And I wanted each one of these characters to kind of play out that complexity in their own way, but at the same time, keep it focused on Victoria's evolution. You know, the novel opens in 1948 when she's only 17 years old, growing up in a small rural Colorado town. I wanted to ask what was possible for this young woman. She meets this young Indigenous drifter, knowing the biases against Indigenous people, especially in rural Colorado in 1948. What was possible for this character? These were hard questions and hard truths that I needed to unpack. We then follow Victoria on her journey all the way until 1971. So, you know, her journey is the primary journey, but I wanted each one of these characters to play a role in her story, but to also evoke some questions in the readers in and of themselves as well.
I was actually wondering if that's why some of Will's backstory was left out, because
Yeah.
it was really about Victoria. When you
Yeah.
open it and walk into his world, it's a whole nother book.
It is.
And it's a whole nother bunch of sorrow.
It is layers and layers of generational sorrow in Wilson Moon. But I appreciate you pointing that out, because I always like the opportunity to talk about Wilson Moon as a character, because hands down, the hardest part of this novel for me to write was Wilson Moon's character. So for me, this novel became about place and displacement once I decided to set the character of Victoria in the town of Viola, because as I mentioned, the town of Viola, generational ranch land, ranching and farming and fishing community on the lower end of the Gunnison Valley, some of the best gold medal fishing waters in the world, a lush, beautiful valley where the farmers and ranchers there had a lot of pride and a lot of commitment and a lot of investment in that land, forced off the land in order to create the reservoir. But of course, well before those predominantly white farmers and ranchers were forced off that land was the violent and horrific displacement of the indigenous people of the western slope of Colorado on that exact same land, the Ute people. So for me, a lot of people look at Blue Mesa Reservoir and just see a beautiful lake. But ever since I was a child, I actually was so haunted by that there were towns at the bottom of that lake, 3 actually, Savoya, Saponero, and Iola, and also indigenous land at the bottom of that lake. And so I knew that I couldn't tell a story about displacement in the American West and not include the indigenous experience on some level. But I also was aware that as a white writer, I had a great challenge before me to not appropriate any element of Wilson Moon's story, to not pretend that I own any element of understanding of such a different cultural heritage. And, you know, I think that that is something for every writer to grapple with. And I think that every individual writer needs to be able to make that decision for him or herself or for themselves about how we write outside of our own cultural and personal experience. But for me, I wanted to not shy away from the horrors of racism. I wanted to include Wilson Moon's story, but I didn't want to pretend that I owned too much of that story. So I chose to see him only through Victoria's lens. And she's a very shy young woman. There's not a lot of dialogue between Wilson Moon and Victoria Nash. So I was able to sort of leave a lot of Wilson Moon's backstory unsaid. And yet all we really need to know about him is that generational pain that he carries from displacement. Yeah. So thank you for letting me speak of that, because I love him. I love him so much. And I love that Victoria Nash loves him, because they're able to love each other, again, transcendent of those biases that might have kept them apart.
And you handled, I think, for the time period, you used the appropriate slang and stuff. Yeah, it
Yeah.
really.
There's a lot of decisions to be made, I
Mhm.
guess, as an author in telling that part of the story.
Did you wind up having to do a lot of research to what historical research?
Well, I'm so grateful that I was raised in a family with tremendous respect for Indigenous people. And I grew up going to the Taos Pueblo as an example, and to areas around Santa Fe and the Four Corners region. It's where Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, literally four corners where you can, as a kid, people go and you put a foot, and hand to hand. So you can have one body part, I guess, in all 4 states at one time. The Four Corners region is home to a variety of tribal nations. And I've done a lot of volunteer work in that area, and also in South Dakota and the Pine Ridge and Cheyenne River Lakota reservations. But also, I was one of the founders of the interdisciplinary environmental studies program at my university, and I was always in charge of the environmental history, philosophy, and literature. So I took great pride in bringing a lot of Native American, indigenous stories and history to my students, always with the idea, the understanding that a lot of the cultural history there was outside of our grasp, but at the same time, such important stories to tell and to acknowledge the complicated history that we have, the tragic history that we have with indigenous populations, certainly in this area as well. And so I did do quite a bit of research to make sure that I had my particulars correct, especially around we do hear that Wilson Moon has run away from one of those horrific quote unquote Indian boarding schools, which is really just one of those awful indoctrination institutions that were really horrific, stole children from their families. I did research around that to make sure that I was representing that accurately. But beyond that, Indigenous history has been such a part of my life. I'm so grateful for that. I think I kind of felt it in my bones in a lot of ways. Yeah. So
I mean, speaking of research and being that you taught environmental studies, I guess this is not a shock, but the nature writing in the book
Yeah.
is just spectacular. And
yeah,
it is,
thank you.
I mean, it's the thing that you draws so many people in. And it's interesting, we were talking about that you're really the first big fiction hit from Spiegel and Grau,
Yeah.
I think, about what they've have a long storied history, both Cindy and Julie, but
Yeah.
like they've really actually been, and nature writing has been their big
Yeah.
thing. And you sort of blend like the old and the new Spiegel and Grau. Could we talk a little about what kind of research you did, what you knew, how the environment and the place plays a part in the story?
Yes, thank you for that. Well, yeah, first of all, enormous gratitude to Spiegel and Grau, my New York City publishers, extraordinary human beings and editors. And honestly, they took a chance on this mid-50s, 50-year-old debut novelist that I don't think a lot of the larger or the corporate, they have since broken off and become independent since they were with Penguin Random House for decades. And I'm so grateful. I was talking with Daniel on the way over that my timing was amazing, that I was able to be one of their first novels that they released because they were able to support me on the level that they have. And I do think the nature writing was something that Cindy Spiegel, my editor, was drawn to. I will say that if Wilson Moon was the hardest part of this novel to write, the natural world was hands down the easiest part of it to write. And there was no research whatsoever needed. I'm a fifth generation Coloradan, deeply, deeply tied to the land. My great-great-grandparents were literally homesteaders coming across in the covered wagons. My great-great-grandparents dug into a hillside and created a sod house up in northeastern Colorado, early 1870s, before Colorado was even a state. I have that love, that deep love of the land. Mountain climbers and farmers and ranchers and people tied to the land is in my bones. I've spent my entire adult life in the Gunnison Valley, which is where the novel is set. And I was lucky enough to have family in the valley well before I was born. Climbed all those mountains, backpacked and skied and rock climbed and whatever, all of that space. Huge area, Gunnison County, almost 90% of it, 85% of it's public lands. And I have immersed myself in this landscape since I was a child. It is my most comfortable. It is where I am most inspired. It is where I learned to be my best self. I've spent my life studying wild rivers and wondering what they know, climbing big mountains. We have 54 14,000-foot peaks in Colorado, the largest concentration of high elevation mountaineering in the country. I've climbed most of those mountains. I do it as a sacred endeavor. I've always wanted to know what the mountains know. I've always wanted to know what the rivers know, and they're so humbling and so instructive. And just by being who I am, of course, I would channel as much as that as I possibly could into this novel. I knew that something essential about Victoria Nash's journey was going to be what she could learn, both from the land that her family cultivated with the peach orchards. We can talk about the peaches, but also from the wild landscape at the time that Victoria sort of cast out into the wilderness in a way. I knew that she was going to have to learn something really essential about herself in that wilderness. And that certainly is an alignment of where I've learned the most valuable lessons about myself has also been in the wilderness. And I love that is what so many readers really resonate. I've taken great joy in how many readers have told me that my novel has sort of turned them back to valuing maybe a piece of their own relationship to the natural world that maybe they have allowed to kind of, I don't know, become too quiet in their life. That to me is one of my absolute greatest joys. You certainly don't need to go climb a 14,000-foot peak to have a relationship to the natural world. You can just tune into the birds that are migrating through right now, or glimpse at the miracle of a flower petal. That minutia is available to all of us, and I think it's very grounding. And I love that is something that people are loving worldwide about the novel. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, I found it to be, and having grown up in New Mexico, the landscape was just so spot on.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
but let's talk about peaches.
Let's talk about
Can we
peaches.
talk about peaches?
Yeah, hold up the cover. Hold. I'm Daniel. Thank you. Peach, a big fat peach on the cover of a book called Go as a River, right? So what do you think? What did I think was going to probably be on the cover of this book? Well, call me crazy. I assumed it was going to be a river. But when Spiegel and Grau put a peach on the cover was actually my first moment where I realized the symbolism of the peaches had such a profound effect on the reader. So if you had a question, yeah, I'll let you answer.
Well, I mean, there's so much to say. It's both structure and metaphor,
Yeah.
and the whole process of the peaches adapting in itself. And I wait until the fruit stand delivers the Colorado peaches before I buy peaches every year.
Yes,
They are the best peaches.
Yes.
Um,
Thank you for saying that, because I try to fit that into all my conversations without being too competitive. But they are the best peaches. There's actually a scientific reason for that. I'll explain that. But
well, I was going to say, so I want to know the research, because garlic does the same thing that the peaches do. So then I was like researching about what that is. So I'm sure you researched this
oh
too.
yes. To answer Daniel's question about the research I might have to do about the natural world, I'm like, none. I had to do a ton of research about peaches. The reason the peaches came into the novel in the first place is I, first of all, needed to give this very ragged Nash family something beautiful. And the peaches are such jewels in Colorado. I'm so grateful that you know about them, because honestly, one of my very first book events outside of Colorado, when the book was released 2 years ago, I had someone, rather skeptically, sort of almost hand on the hip, kind of, do you really grow peaches in Colorado? And like very skeptical. And I was, as a fifth generation Colorado kid, I was like, what? I think I maybe assumed everybody knew we grew these magnificent peaches in Colorado, but we truly do on the Western Slope. And they are Colorado jewels. And I wanted to celebrate them in this book, but I wanted to give the Nash family something beautiful. And I also wanted to give Victoria Nash something that she could potentially save and hold on to in a story that has so much loss, right? And so the peaches started looming very large in my mind, and I did have to do so much research. So I did a little bit of research online, but then I was like, what am I doing? I'm just going straight to the source. I went directly to the generational peach farmers on the Western Slope, sat down with these lovely humans who've learned the artistry of growing peaches in Colorado, because it's very difficult to do, from the great-grandparents all the way down. And Palisade peaches are on the Grand Junction, Grand Valley area, and then also Paonia and Hotchkiss that are in the novel. Sat down with the peach growers and I was like, tell me everything you know. Took copious amounts of notes, talked into my phone fairly frequently. I thank a lovely peach grower named Lee Bradley in the back of the book, Orchard Valley Farms in Paonia, where I literally walked away from talking with him, talking into my phone, being like, okay, oh my gosh, you have all that wrong. You need to go back and fix this thing, because once I really went to the absolute source, they educated me. And I came away from those conversations with just so much more admiration and love for Colorado peaches, because what they did teach me is it's that generational knowledge that makes it possible, because it's so darn hard to do so. Daniel really wants to know about the scientific evidence.
Well, no, one of the things I was thinking about while you were saying that was, in combining your peach research or your pea search or whatever.
My search.
And you're writing, like, I'm curious. So you wrote about it, then you go to the experts. So what's
Yeah.
something that was important that you had to change?
That I had so wrong.
Yeah.
Well, one of the main questions that I had for them was, would it be? So as the floodwaters rise, Victoria Nash's generational family peach farm, Nash Peaches. As the floodwaters rise in Iola and in that farmland, the threat is that the entire ancestral peach orchard is going to be destroyed. And so part of the plot is that she has to try to save these peaches, right? So one of the main questions I had for them was about the idea of transplantation, which we'll talk about thematically and symbolically here in a moment. But is it even possible? Can you transplant an entire peach orchard? So that was one thing that I had wrong, in that I had originally Victoria thinking, at least, and again, I won't give any plot away, but thinking at least that she could just transplant the entire peach orchard. And what the peach farmers taught me is that a good peach tree only produces really exquisite peaches for about 20 years. And so knowledgeable farmers have blocks, and they know exactly the age of each one of those blocks, and they rotate those blocks out. And so there's always a like a cover crop in one quadrant, and or one section. And so what they taught me was that you could, in fact, transplant a peach orchard. They told me, they're like, possible, yes. Preferable, no. I think was the phrase. And I was like, ooh, possible is all I need. Thank you. Thank you very much. But he said, but you wouldn't take the oldest block of trees because they're basically done. And so I just incorporated, I had that wrong. I went back and fixed it. I ended up incorporating it into Victoria's sorrow of leaving, because those oldest peach trees were family to her. They'd always been in her life. And that actually enhanced the story. So that's one thing I had wrong. I'm sure I had a lot of other things wrong too, but God, I love talking to those peach growers. So what I learned is that Colorado peaches, it's our warm days and our cool nights. So that would differentiate from say a Georgia peach, where it's pretty warm. It's really hot in the day all summer and into the fall, but there's not a real cool down in most of the country. In Colorado, we're wearing our down jackets every night. It's lovely sleeping weather. Most of Colorado, it cools down. There can be a 50-degree temperature differential between day and night. And so the warm days and the cool nights sweeten the peaches. And as the nights become cooler and cooler as the summer progresses and turns into fall, the peaches get sweeter and sweeter and sweeter. And those late season peaches are just something to behold. They're about the size of softballs, and literally when you eat them, the juice drips down off your elbow. And they're amazing. I've had a few readers be like, dang it, I read your book in January and I couldn't find a decent peach anywhere. You know, you're not really going to want to eat a canned peach while you read this book. But so that's some science, is that broad temperature differential that sweetens the peaches. And then just as soon as that nighttime temperature dips below freezing, they all just turn to mush and they're gone. So there's a real artistry to when to pick them. And I tried to get that in the book. Then the other thing is we have the western slope of Colorado is on the edge of 14, 13, 12,000 foot peaks that are covered in snow until August. And that snow runoff has particular minerals in the runoff that then feeds those peach orchards, and those particular minerals also scientifically feed the peaches sweetness as well. So there you have it. So my final event in this long book tour is in South Carolina. I wasn't going to claim the best peaches in the world, but if I'm challenged, I do have scientific evidence for maybe we might have a little edge over Georgia and South Carolina peaches. But the symbolism of the peaches become this idea. They mimic that Victoria Nash's long journey to sort of discover the depth of her strength and resilience, to discover her identity. It's very hard fought and very hard won for Victoria. And so the peaches become a symbol of growing against the odds. Peaches in Colorado certainly grow against the odds. Victoria Nash grows against the odds. So that's how I have them intertwined symbolically. And then also this idea of resilience in new soil. As Victoria is facing displacement, this idea of, can she start a life in a new place, parallels the peaches also put down new roots and be resilient in new soil. So the symbolism of the peaches becomes a powerful force in the novel. And like I said, they're one beautiful thing for poor Victoria Nash, who really does suffer quite a lot. Yeah.
And the peaches well, I mean, they blossom early, and if they blossom too early,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
lose the whole crop. So it's
Yes.
like managing that whole space.
Yes, you never know when you're going to get a hard frost in Colorado. And oftentimes those blossoms in the spring all get killed off. Oftentimes just when the peaches become the best and the sweetest in the fall, we have an early frost and everything gets killed off. And so it's risky business growing peaches in Colorado. Yeah.
And I love how you talk about them having to prep the soil.
Yeah.
And then how they graft, and it's that grafting over again and again from
Yeah.
that. They get used to their climate, and that's why they work there.
Yeah,
You can't take
exactly.
a Georgia peach tree and
Right.
plant it in Colorado.
Exactly. And originally, that's where they did originally come from, with homesteaders coming across. And somebody had to have brought a peach tree along that probably 90% of those trees died. We have a very arid climate in Colorado, very arid. I've actually been really enjoying the moisture in your air. And you have so much oxygen. Oh my God. It's so true.
It's so true.
I'm sleeping like a baby. I live every day of my life at 9,000 feet. We have no oxygen up there. It's ridiculous. And you know, your lips crack, and it's a very arid climate. So to adapt what would originally have been a southeastern climate peach to the arid regions of Colorado, it took a lot of labor, a lot of optimism, and a lot of time to make those work. So yeah, yeah, appreciate your oxygen. When you lay down tonight, be like, Shelley was right. This feels wonderful. I'll talk about the symbolism of the river as well, if I may. You know, the peaches and the rivers become the dominant metaphors of the novel in relation to Victoria's journey. The idea of what does it mean to go as a river. Early on in the novel, Wilson Moon says to Victoria Nash, "I'll go as a river. It's what my grandfather taught me is the only way." She sort of pretends that she knows what that means, but she has no idea what that means. She's just too shy to ask. And I kind of love that about Victoria. There's a deep humility in her shyness, but also I love that she claims herself as we go along little by little. The entire rest of the novel is Victoria trying to figure out what this means, and sort of a cathartic scene later in the novel where she kind of finally figures it out in her own heart. But there are three rivers in the novel that really become characters in and of themselves, I think. The Gunnison River, the North Fork, and the Animas River in the Durango Four Corners area. These are rivers that I know intimately. We live in a very beautiful, very active watershed where all of the tributaries into the East River, the Gunnison River, into the Colorado, because I live in such a mountainous region, these hillsides are flowing with waterfalls and rivers all the time. And as I said earlier, I've studied them my entire life. And for me, the symbolism, the dominant metaphor of the novel, of the rivers all the way through the novel, is that rivers always find a way to move forward, right? They up and over obstacle, around. They carve new banks when necessary. In my valley, all the different tributaries, no river follows the exact same path year to year. They carve new banks. They gather strength along the way. Sometimes they're rushing like they are right now during high snowmelt season. Other times they're calm. I find that a powerful metaphor for life. Because as I mentioned before, you know, how much empathy that I have for all of us. You know, I went through a very unexpected, very tragic loss in my family and in my life while I was writing this book. I also had to face a really difficult illness. My husband was recovering from a very unexpected brain injury. We had a lot of challenges in our life in the time that I was writing this novel. And what it really just made me realize is the degree to which all of us are up against something, as I mentioned earlier. But I think then this idea of that we may all go as a river, that we can find a way forward, no matter what obstacle is put in our way. The idea that that is where we discover our individual strength and resilience. And what I've found is we are all stronger and more resilient than we ever knew we could be until we have to bear the seemingly unbearable. And that is why I put Victoria Nash through so many losses and difficulties throughout the course of the story, because I wanted her to grow in a 2 steps forward, 1 step back sort of way, because I do think that that is a more accurate way that we all try to move forward. We try to bolster with every challenge, but then we falter. But the key is that you just keep finding a way to move forward, as Victoria does. So ultimately, what does it mean to go as a river? That is at least the hope that I hope that readers take that away from the book, a deeper understanding of your own ability to move forward no matter what obstacle comes in your way. And to me, that's the dominant metaphor of the book.
You answer the questions before I can ask them.
Sorry.
But
I do that
I
sometimes.
did want to say, I don't want to, we often ask like, what books are you reading? But I'm curious, as you spent 13 years writing the book, were there any books that you were inspired you and you said, I want to write a book as powerful as that, or, like just.
Yeah, most of that was before I started writing the book, because I have all my background, educational background, undergraduate, master's, PhD, is all in literary studies. I've just been a book geek from day one. I wrote a 66-page book when I was 9 years old.
Oh, it's the follow-up.
It's the
coming in
follow-up.
2026.
Exactly. A masterwork of literature called Peter the Porcupine. That's true. But the fun thing about that is my mom brought it down from the attic after my novel was released, and in the envelope was the assignment from my 3rd grade teacher, and I was supposed to write a 2-page short story, and I wrote a 66-page book. So suffice it to say, I've been a kind of a loving narrative and loving story my whole life. So I was just obsessed with studying literature because I think everything is in books, right? You want to know about history, psychology, philosophy, ecology. It's all in the experiences that characters have in books. And so I just had this kind of vast imagination. I kind of wanted to know everything about everything. And I knew it was all in literature. So I just studied it. So I feel like I have this beautiful backpack on my back of this wide swath of different kinds of writers and literature that has informed everything about how I teach and how I write. But I will say, specifically, I have always loved the very quiet, very beautiful, character-driven stories of Marilynne Robinson. I love Marilynne Robinson novels, and I actually sometimes have to be a little careful who I recommend them to, because they're quiet enough that I've had other people come back to me and be like, no, I did not connect with this. If you're more of a plot-driven reader, they might not be for you. But if you like character and place and quieter novels, which I do, I actually was worried this novel was going to be too quiet in a way once in the world. But I love the quiet novels of Marilynne Robinson, and I do love nature writers. I've taught a lot of nature writers in my career, and the more typical names that you would think of when you think of nature writers, like some of the American transcendentalists. But then I moved on to more mid and late 20th century nature writers, and I love some of the female nature writers. Annie Dillard is someone that I open the novel with an Annie Dillard quote. Love her. I love Terry Tempest Williams, who's a woman who's generationally from Utah, in a similar way that I'm generationally from Colorado, and she writes so beautifully. I love the poetry of Mary Oliver. I love Rilke. I love poetry. I probably study and read more poetry than anything else. But I love quiet language, place, and character-driven literature. And I don't tend to read a lot while I'm writing. I don't like to get other people's stories mixed up with my own, but a lot of the reading that I've done has really informed who I am as a writer and kind of my instinct for narrative. And I always give young writers that advice of it's almost more important than you're reading than that you're writing. Like, be a big reader first, and you're going to develop some intuitions, and then find your writerly self. So I think that's my answer.
Well, that was my question, which nature writers?
Yeah, yeah. Well, so many actually. Barry Lopez and I love Lucille Clifton is one of my favorite poets. Like, I don't know. I think you can. There's a whole every book in this beautiful, beautiful bookshop. There's a whole world contained in that, and I've always had so much admiration for anybody who has the stick to itiveness. What's the word? Like the determination to get a book in the world and to put their unique perspective out in the world that somebody could maybe engage with. And with all of these accolades that Lisa mentioned with my introduction, I have got to tell you, hands down, the thing that I am most proud of with this book is that I finished it. I honestly have no idea how I finished it. It's all a blur, other than where it first began. And it's all a blur. I was raising my kids. I was teaching. I don't know how I finished this book, but it was all for Victoria Nash. I love her so much. I was so driven by telling her story as best as I possibly could. I assure you, I did not sit down to write a bestseller. I merely sat down to be true to this young woman that I love and tell her story the best that I possibly could. And I have no idea how I finish it, but damn, I'm glad I did.
Should we do some audience questions?
That
I
sounds
would
like a
love
good
that.
idea.
Yeah, I would love
And
that.
one of us will repeat it. Maybe you repeat it.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, that's good. One of you do it because I always say I'll repeat the question and always I forget to repeat the
Yeah.
question. So thank you. That would be good.
Lisa has a stick-to-itiveness. She won't forget.
I will forget.
A
Okay.
weird word, but I like it.
Am I calling on people too?
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
So she wants to talk more about the Ruby, and I just lost her last.
Ruby Alice Akers.
Oh, Ruby
Yeah, the
Alice,
Ruby
yeah.
Alice Akers story.
I was like looking for
Well,
my
I was-
list of characters.
I was thinking of her first when Daniel asked me the question about some of the backstory on some of the more minor characters, although she ends up playing a very essential role. She first came to mind because I love her. I love her so much. You know, I think she first evolved in my imagination around as a parallel character to Wilson Moon as two outcasts, right? They're two outcasts. I really wanted to kind of unpack this idea of bias and prejudice in any given society, but especially in a small rural Colorado town, of which I live in one, and the idea of who gets to be included as quote unquote acceptable, and who gets to decide that somebody is outside of those narrow boundaries of acceptability. You know, we're struggling with that very openly in our world right now. We've always struggled with that as human beings. This idea of bias that generally comes from ignorance and stereotyping as opposed to actually getting to know that human being. Generally, if you can look another human being in the eye and say, tell me your story, all biases are out the window because you're like, oh my gosh, you're actually just a human exactly like I am. And so I wanted to ask, why would Ruby Alice Akers be considered sort of unacceptable? Why would this lovely young man, Wilson Moon, be considered unacceptable? So they're both sort of outcasts. And yet the more that we get to know about them, we find out that they're both actually really lovely. I also wanted Ruby Alice Akers to be an example similar to Uncle Og, two people in the novel who carry a lot of grief, and the grief has essentially broken their spirits. Like I said earlier, I have a lot of compassion for that. And so she ends up being a hero of sorts, an unexpected hero in the novel. We learn that she can still love, so she is not in fact broken. But I love her so much, and I sometimes get the question, am I going to write a sequel to this novel? And that has never occurred to me ever until my very first book event. When somebody asked me that question, I was like, oh no. The question they asked actually was, you clearly ended this novel on a cliffhanger. So clearly you're going to write a sequel. And I was like, wait, what? And I was like, I did? And I was like, I did not. I did not. I ended the novel exactly where I wanted, knowing that I had given, or feeling at least that I had given the reader enough information about all of these characters that you at least can imagine what they're capable of going forward. So no, I am not planning on writing a sequel to Go as a River. However, I have been thinking lately that I would love to go back and tell all of Ruby Alice's backstory and actually write a novel I actually wish I had thought of that earlier, because it would be I am writing a second book right now, and I'm struggling with it a little bit. I think that would have been an easier novel for me to write, because I'm still in this go as a river headspace, right? But I love her so much that I might end up telling her story someday. But I love that she resonates with people, because she's not a typical heroine, and she's someone that would be very easy to dismiss. And instead, she really gets in people's hearts, and I'm really grateful for that. So thank you for that question. Yeah, I'll let. Yeah, you guys can choose that. Yeah.
You were still teaching.
Yeah.
Would having written the novel affect the way you teach, the way you
Ah. Oh, that's a great question. Can I repeat
Yes.
that? Because I'm remembering too. The question, if I was still teaching, would having written the novel and this experience that I've had affect how I teach and what I teach? I retired from teaching. I took, I took quote unquote early retirement in 2018, which is literally just a fancy way for saying I quit my job. And I think we tend to romanticize the, hey, be an artist and quit your day job and be a artist. But actually the reality of that is completely terrifying. My husband's a flight paramedic, right? He's a superhero. He's a search and rescue guy, a ski patrolman, a flight paramedic. That he's a superhero, but it doesn't pay super well. I taught at a small mountain university. We didn't really have a lot of a safety net, and yet I just knew that if I'd been teaching already for almost 30 years, I knew that if I continued to teach full time, there was no way that I was going to finish this book and get it in the world. So I took this very, very scary leap. I picked up weird, odd jobs in the meantime. My husband picked up extra shifts, bless him. I had an agent at that point. And actually, I don't even know if I had officially signed with my agent, but I just knew that it was time, right? It was a leap. I believe that everything has its season in life. It had been my season to be a writer as a younger woman. It was my season to be a teacher and a mom for those 30 years. And I just knew in my soul that it was the season for me to be a writer. And so I left my job, and I was actually really ready to do that. So it's actually a little bit hard for me to answer that question, to sort of imagine if I was still teaching, because as much as I loved it, I was really ready to be done and move into this different phase of my life. I think what I would give my students is just, I always found myself as a real cheerleader as a teacher. I thought my role was to help discover their individual genius and to really cheer them on in finding that in their lives. And I would still be doing that. But I would encourage them to have as much patience and give oneself as much generosity and grace as I've given myself, to let it all evolve exactly as it should. Because I was that young creative writing student, as an undergraduate, and yet I didn't publish my first novel till I was 57. I would probably be a little more heavy-handed in helping them to understand that everything evolves exactly as it should. And beyond that, I'm not sure that I would teach a whole lot differently. But I have to say, I am so grateful that I'm not trying to do both. I'm really grateful to have stepped into this next phase of my life, and that it all worked out okay. It worked out really well, actually. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you. Sure. Her quote was, "We were not allowed to cross our legs in church." I've never had anybody quote that one back at me. That's great. Yeah. 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 Yeah, so thank you for that. And thank you for being a careful reader. Like I said, I crafted all of these sentences very intentionally. So when readers underline or highlight or see a beautiful line or something, it always means a lot to me. So the other quote that she was saying was, I was without a mother, I was patternless. Surrounded by males, I was patternless. So I gave away my answer in my misquote. Victoria Nash's mother dies when she's 12 years old. We learn that on the first pages of the novel, so it doesn't really give anything away. Victoria is coming of age in a house full of very ragged, difficult men, and she is patternless. She doesn't know how to be a woman. She doesn't know what that even means. Her body is changing. She doesn't know anything that's happening to her. She's a very solitary creature all through the novel. Her best friends are the trees. She's very shy. She doesn't, Zelda is really the first real friend of her life, and that comes in very late in the novel. And so this idea that she was patternless, I wanted to put her in that very solitary situation so that she was forced to discover herself, right? Even that we weren't allowed to cross our legs in church, that goes back to this very narrow parameters of acceptability in 1948 rural Colorado, and how I just wanted to unpack and kind of explode all of that and say, actually, here are all these other ways of being. Here are all these different kinds of people that we owe it to ourselves to open up our hearts and our minds to be more accepting of otherness, to be less vitriolic and fearful of otherness. Unfortunately, it is still such a problem in our culture and in our world. And I really wanted Victoria to play a role in that with her love of Wilson Moon. And I really wanted her to also play a role in that, of how to kind of show that a young woman in 1948 would have to fight really hard. And I really am inspired by my own grandmothers in telling this story, how hard they had to fight to claim their identity, to claim their own journeys, to be able to be who they needed to be in the world, when they were always, rather than being who they were quote unquote supposed to be. I think that's any human being's journey, but I think that it can be particularly hard for women or anybody outside of the acceptable parameters of what is considered normal within any given culture. And I just, again, I have so much empathy for that. And I think that's why I made Victoria such a solitary character. I think that's actually going to be a kind of a tricky part of the film that they want to make, is that there's very little dialogue in the novel. Victoria spends long stretches by herself. I'm not sure how they're going to handle that in the film, but I'm curious about that because I don't want that essential element of the novel to be lost. I love my time alone. It's where I discover myself, and I hope that we all can be comfortable enough in ourselves that we can discover really essential things about ourselves when we are unplugged, preferably in a natural landscape and all by ourselves, you know. So thank you for that question.
Two more questions and maybe go instead of just the first row.
I know, I'm sorry.
Maybe go
We're
over
being a little bit.
Second row.
Super quick, yeah. Yeah, gosh, I don't know. They did originally ask me if I wanted to be involved in writing the screenplay, and I think my answer was some version of, "Oh, hell no." And that's mostly because writing a screenplay is very much its own art form, and it's very outside of my wheelhouse. I would not know how to do that. But it's a wonderful production company that specializes in books to film only, and books that they love, and these are book people. I feel like I'm in very good hands, and they have told me that I can be as involved as I'd like to be. But I know that there's going to be a lot of letting go because it is its own art form. It's also a very, very slow process, and I'm super busy, so I don't actually think about it.
Is this
very
Mitchell Kaplan's
Mitchell
company? Oh.
Kaplan? Yeah, so I love that you know Mitch. Of course, you know Mitch. Mitchell Kaplan, for any of you who don't know, Books and Books in Miami, Florida. He is the OG of independent bookshops. He is the founder of the Miami Book Festival, which is the OG of book festivals, the original. And he also is the president of the American Booksellers Association for a long time. Mitchell Kaplan, one of the most lovely human beings I have ever met. It's his production company with his production partner, who's a producer in Hollywood, Paula Mazur. Mitch and Paula, two of the most lovely people. I would be completely steamrolled in Hollywood. And so I am so grateful that Mitch and Paula are in charge of this project. I have every faith that they will do a wonderful job. Yeah.
One more back, or maybe not. Okay, we got
Yeah.
in the front row.
Yeah, sorry. You've been very patient. Yes. Yeah. Oh, I know. I know. You know, Daniel and I were talking earlier. It is so hard to get a book in the world. It really is. And so I am so deeply grateful for every single moment that the stars aligned and opened up an opportunity for me. I am so grateful for every single person that believed in this book along the way and took a chance on me, because I am highly aware how against the odds that is. I really am. the question was about the publishing process and sort of how this happened for me. And I'll be brief, but I'm a very solitary writer. I don't show my work to anyone. I'm working on a second novel now that literally nobody on the planet has seen, not even my husband and my daughter and my mom, who are sort of my first readers of Go as a River. Once I felt like, okay, maybe I have something here, I shared it with very few intimate people in my life, and then at some point, I guess I felt confident enough to seek out an agent. That was the only quick part for me of this publishing journey. Is Sandra Bond, who is my literary agent in Denver. She saw something special in this novel, and she signed me right away, and I'm so grateful for that. Yes, my family was very sweet. I even thank my husband in the acknowledgments for crying every single time he read this book, which was dozens of times in all of its different forms. So bless him. But he was a little biased, right? I wasn't so sure. I'd go out in the world and say, well, my husband thinks it's good. Like, I'm not sure that. So he was right in the end, but it was really Sandra that came along exactly when I needed her, somebody in the industry who believed in my book. And I really needed to hear that at that moment, right? I had been chipping away at this for so long. I had no idea what the process was. I was really ignorant going into all of this. It's been a huge learning curve for me, starting a whole new career at my age, learning about the publishing world. I'm so grateful to Sandra. She's the very first person that I thank in my acknowledgments, because when I needed her the most, she believed in me. And then she was absolutely determined to get this book in the correct hands. And she did. And I am so grateful for that. But it took almost 3 years, 2.5 years for her of querying the novel to find the right publisher, to get it in someone's hands like Cindy Spiegel, who would believe in the book, who the quieter parts of the book, the natural world, really resonated with Cindy, as Daniel was saying. But it's all a very slow process. But the time that I left my job and got an agent in 2018, I was signed with Spiegel and Grau in 2021. The novel was released in 2023. So a long process. And like I said, a lot of really lovely people who have believed in me all along the way. The international component to the novel was, no one is more shocked than I, when Lisa's reading the bio. No one is more shocked about this than I. I had no idea any of this was happening. Before this novel was released here in the United States in 2023, it was already contracted to be translated into over 30 languages all over the world. And bless Spiegel and Grau, my publisher. They gave the manuscript to an international agent her name is Susanna Lee. She's a lovely human being. Her office is in Paris, an iconic, decades-long, wonderful, brilliant literary agent who loved the book so much that she started sending it out to publishing houses all over Europe and actually Asia as well, with her backing, saying how much she loved it. And she's worked with these publishing houses. So I actually ended up having individual contracts with, well, I don't know, 30 something publishers all over the world, thanks to Susanna. And that's how the kind of the backstory on the 34 languages. And I've been on book tour, 3 big European book tours. I have relationships now with publishing houses all over the world. Those are all individual contracts, but all sparked by Spiegel and Grau's involvement, so I owe it all to them for sure. But I tell you this because I had no idea that any of this worked the way that it did. And it just so happened to work this way for my book. I don't know that it works this way for all books, but again, the same advice I would give my students if I was still writing. Any of you who are writers or you have a dream of a book, first of all, chip it away at it little by little and just keep believing in that book and that project, because you have a story to tell that literally nobody else on the planet can tell. And then after that, fight for that book in the world, but understand that it is a very subjective, very slow, oftentimes very frustrating process, but just give it the time that it needs to evolve. I look around this bookshop and I think, well, all of these authors stuck with it long enough to get it in the world. I think I can do that too, right? And you find the path that is going to open up for you, but do understand that it's complicated and it's difficult, but just find the right people that are really going to believe in your book. That's what made all the difference for me. And I'm so grateful. Yeah.
Well, let's give a big hand.
Thank you. Thank you all.